Vincent van Gogh was born on March 30th in 1853 in the Netherlands. Van Gogh had a supportive mother, but his father was harsh and conservative and did not appreciate Van Gogh's creativity. Van Gogh's birth came a year after the birth of his older stillborn brother, whose name was Vincent as well. He was buried nearby so that Van Gogh was forced to walk by a headstone with his name on it every day on his way to school. Van Gogh also had a younger brother named Theo, who was very supportive of all his endeavors in the art world. He continuously supported Vincent both financially and emotionally, causing them to be very close. Van Gogh lived most of his life in poverty due to his compassion for those less fortunate than him. He was known to give away his possessions to others, leaving him poor, and he would often sleep on the ground because he wanted to feel the pain of the impoverished. Despite all his attempts, one man's compassion could not always help those in need, causing Van Gogh to feel depressed, knowing he could not make a difference. In 1873, Van Gogh moved to England for a job at a gallery in London. Here he fell in love with not only the culture, but his landlord's daughter. However, upon her rejection, he suffered a mental breakdown and devoted his life to God. This endeavor was short-lived, and in the fall of 1880, he decided to move to Brussels to become a full-time artist. He began to socialize and learn from other artists in the area, and also taught himself many painting techniques. He ultimately fell in love with a prostitute, and once she went back to prostitution, he gave up most of his possessions and began to live a nomadic lifestyle, drawing and painting wherever he went. By the age of 32, he had moved to Paris and truly started creating his masterpieces. In Paris, he was introduced and influenced by Japanese art and wanted to travel there, but without the means to do so, he moved into a little yellow house in Arles. He spent most of his money on art supplies rather than food, causing him often to fall sick, in addition to suffering from many mental breaks. It is believed that Van Gogh suffered from many health issues, including depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, substance abuse, and a form of epilepsy. This is believed to be the cause of the accident which caused Van Gogh to cut off his ear, which he later allegedly offered to a prostitute. It was after this incident that Van Gogh decided to admit himself into a mental health facility. In this facility, he met Dr. Gogh, who agreed to take him on as a patient, and soon he became one of Van Gogh's closest friends. He arranged for Van Gogh to have his art supplies with him at all times because art was clearly a major benefactor in his mental health. During the last 70 days of his life, he painted 70 paintings, including Starry Night. Van Gogh struggled a lifelong battle of mental illness and eventually suffered from a possibly self-inflicted gunshot wound and died at the age of 37, in the field depicted in his last great work of art entitled Wheatfield with Crows. His younger brother, so distraught by the death of Van Gogh, died 6 months later in an asylum and was buried right next to his brother. The bedroom, created in 1889 by Vincent van Gogh, depicts Van Gogh's bedroom while staying in his yellow house in Arles, a city in the south of France. This move had excited him and cultivated a new hope that is clearly evident through the bright colors Van Gogh chose to use in this piece. This piece demonstrates Van Gogh's innate knowledge of color theory, matching contrasting colors like oranges with blues or reds with greens to make it a very vibrant piece. The lack of shadows in this piece is perhaps not evident at first. However, once you notice it, it's impossible not to see its importance. With no shadows, there's no doubt or worry portrayed in this piece. Originally created to decorate his house for guests, he wrote later about this piece, saying, "Looking at the picture ought to rest the brain, or rather, the imagination." Van Gogh created 3 versions of this original painting, sending one to a friend, one to his brother Theo, and one to his mother. 20% of all adolescents will experience depression before they reach adulthood. 50% of these teens will be affected by age 14, and 75% will have a full-blown mental illness by 24. Unfortunately, in today's society, people are often ridiculed for having a mental illness, being told that it is all in their heads and that they are making their symptoms up. It is our intention to shine a light not only on these staggering statistics, but also the negative connotation a mental illness can carry. We've decided to take a stand to eliminate the stigma surrounding mental illness and have more control in how the world views it. For this project, we have created a rendition of Vincent van Gogh's Bedroom in Arles. This painting is concerned with how mental illness is perceived by others and how it actually feels to someone who is suffering. Due to Vincent van Gogh's use of phenomenological space, the piece lends itself nicely to portray the warped perspective that someone suffering from a mental illness can perceive. A person living with mental illness might be marginalized as a normal person by others who can't see the whole picture. These people, who are only seeing a small fraction of someone's life, could be said to be looking through a keyhole. Thus the keyhole in the middle of our painting. Inside this keyhole symbolizes the part that the mental illness sufferer allows everyone else to see. It is brightly colored and less distorted than the rest of the painting, suggesting happiness or possibly normalcy. Outside of the keyhole, we find darker and more muted colors, symbolizing the sadness or isolation one can feel because of a mental illness. The flooring at the bottom of the painting shows the idea that when you have a mental illness, the ground beneath your feet seems to be crumbling. In our rendition of Bedroom in Arles, the bed frame is falling apart. This is to represent the lack of sleep or upset sleep schedule that someone with a mental illness may be facing. This is also meant to symbolize a fault in the one place which is generally thought to be safe and comforting, and how sometimes with a mental illness this can be taken away. The bed outside the keyhole is also messy and unmade. This is to show the sometimes messy and dirty reality behind mental illness. The family photo is meant to convey the toll that personal relationships can face when someone is facing a mental illness. In the original, there were portraits on the wall above the bed. We got rid of these to represent a lack of social interaction and connections that can be brought on by mental illness. The family photo that is broken shows that sometimes relationships with family members or friends can be tested and broken. We made many changes to this piece, suggesting that it could belong to anybody in today's society. These changes include the beanbag, clothing on the back wall, laptop, and an office desk chair. The poster on the wall of a model in a swimsuit has replaced the mirror in the original painting, suggesting the unattainable body and beauty images given to us by the media. These often lead to a feeling of depression or unworthiness because of their unrealistic nature. This concept is also portrayed in the nail polish found on the desk. The windows also carry important significance. The outside world is painted a similar color to the inside world because when living with a mental illness, everything feels very monotone and the same wherever you go. As far as small details, there are some pill bottles on the table. These represent the staggeringly low 40% of all mentally ill that were treated in the past year. The flowers on the desk are a nod to Van Gogh, as he found happiness in the color yellow, and by placing them next to the pill bottles and by the window, we have suggested that when getting treatment, an affected person is trying their best to attain happiness.